So, turning first of all to Iran, I think that everybody should be very clear-eyed about one reality. If your goal is to bring about an end to a regime that has been steadily dug in for no less than 47 years, it's going to require action, activity, a strategy, a campaign that lasts for longer than 40 days and nights, which is currently the duration of the Israeli-American bombing runs over the skies of Iran. That is simply a reality that's at hand. Now, because we're in the midst of a very tenuous ceasefire, we're seeing those ceasefire talks being very inconclusive. They began with a very clear diktat, a correct diktat by the American president that expressed that Iran must not have a nuclear weapon. And over time, we have seen the Iranians do that which they know to do best, namely to slow down the negotiations. And they've now, most recently, put forward an idea that given that the Americans and the Iranians will not reach an agreement on the notion of bringing about an end to Iran's nuclear weapons pursuit, they ought to first sit down and to negotiate an end to the tensions over the Straits of Hormuz. Both countries, incidentally, at that negotiating table are enacting a blockade at this time. The Americans are doing so, the Iranians are doing so. Contrary to what the media is saying, I believe that the American blockade of the Straits of Hormuz is proving itself to be very, very effective indeed. In simple terms, if Iran is not able to import or to export because of this blockade, that is going to affect the Iranian economy without question. Remember, those people by their thousands, in their droves, who were protesting, who were rising up in the streets of Iran, they were doing so primarily because of economic pressures. They weren't doing so in the pursuits of a democracy, although that might have eventuated later had they been successful. They weren't doing so because they were Zionists. They weren't doing so because they wanted to emulate the United States of America. They were powered first and foremost by economic frustrations. Now, as a result of this blockade, and as a result of this war, which is ongoing, a blockade, incidentally, is a very clear act and instrument of war. It's nothing short of that. Prices of medicines, basic treatments for the Iranian people are skyrocketing. The presence of water is becoming increasingly scarce, and the Iranians are starting to come back out into the streets. So, in my opinion, America actually has time on its side if we look at the pragmatic outcome, the practical outcome of the blockade. And Iran is actually the party with its back up against the wall. It is, as I said, walking directly towards a return of the uprisings that we saw prior to this military campaign against them by the Iranian people. It is also facing the very real challenge of an inability to store and to extract and to export the crude oil that it's mining. I'm told that that's going to have a massive deleterious effect upon their ability to do that in the future if they don't find a resolution to that. And in addition to that, they have shown very clearly to their people that they are unable to defend themselves militarily and they're unable to protect their regime militarily. So it's Iran whose back is against the wall. Unfortunately, mainstream media is claiming that it's actually America that's under time constraints. Now, if we are to look at the time constraints that are at play with the Americans, it essentially comes down to one thing and one thing only, namely the midterm elections that are coming toward the Trump administration, during the course of which most political analysts are assessing that there is going to be a blue wave that we see. We've seen such predictions in the past. They didn't come true. I don't know whether it will be the case on this occasion, but from a military point of view, not a political point of view, it is America that holds the cards, and people would do well to understand that. With regard to the negotiations, I think that we need to boil this down to its simplest parts. You can look at what's happening with regard to Iran and essentially pursue what we call a flow chart, where you ask yourself a series of questions, and if the answer is yes, you proceed in one direction, and if the answer is no, you proceed in a different direction. The question that needs to be asked at every stage during these negotiations is whether or not the action being taken by Israel and the United States brings about an end to Iran's nuclear weapons pursuit. If it does not bring about that outcome, we have to move on to an option set that does bring that about and not stop prior to that outcome being extracted from this conflict. So one of the questions that's been asked is whether or not there is anything that the Americans and the Israelis would return to bombing in the event that there is a return to the conflict. Now, I'm not privy to the target package that is being examined, but I think it's very clear and apparent that when it comes to identifying relevant targets and then striking those relevant targets, whether stand on or stand off, Israel and America are very adept at doing so. I do know from my contacts in Israel that Israel stands ready to return to the bombing campaign, basically at the push of a button. It does have a very rich target bank that it wants to continue to strike at. I have faith in their ability to do so, and I have faith in the Americans' ability to do so. And one development that really strengthens that faith is that the USS H.W. Bush carrier striker group is either already in the region or just in the final stages of getting to the region. And in addition to that, at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, we are seeing that there is a massive buildup of refueling airframes from the United States military. So if past is prologue, I believe that if the negotiations fail, everything is in place or is about to be in place for a return to the bombing campaign against this regime, against its nuclear weapons pursuit, against its ballistic missile campaign, and against its ability to array across Israel's borders a terror proxy set that has really, really proven to be unacceptable to Israel, rightfully so. One last thing about the Straits of Hormuz that people should keep in mind. If you think back to the events prior to the JCPOA or the Iran deal in 2015, one of the aspects that accompanied the credible military threat against that regime was a biting or crippling sanctions campaign, as it was called, that was led by the United States of America. Now, that sanctions campaign took years of work by the Americans to bring about through diplomatic channels, through the United Nations and other international organizations. Think about the toil and the time that went into that sanctions campaign, and then contrast it with what the Iranians are now in possession of vis-a-vis the Straits of Hormuz. If they are permitted to maintain their control over their area of the Straits of Hormuz, what they know is that whenever they wish to reenact a blockade, they are able to do so almost immediately, and they are therefore able to effectively sanction economically huge parts of the global economy, huge parts of the West, by way of blockading the straits. In other words, they can hold the world to economic sanctions in a snap-on, snap-off manner. That's why this issue of the Straits of Hormuz will eventually need to be resolved in favor of freedom of navigation. So tragically, this past Sunday, Sergeant Idan Fox was killed by way of a suicide drone strike launched by Hezbollah towards where the Israel Defense Forces and Sergeant Fox was operating at the time. And in addition to Sergeant Idan Fox, there were several other soldiers who were injured by way of this drone attack. Now, this is very difficult for people to understand, but the drone that is being used is an FPV, fiber optic guided drone. It's very different to the drones that Israel has traditionally had to fight and had to deal with and had to combat. For example, this particular set of drones is very resistant to the electronic measures that would be taken to jam the signal and to end the threat from the drone that was incoming towards Israeli forces. In addition to that, as a result of that, it's very difficult to identify these drones when they're on their way. And if they are identified, it tends to be at the last minute. Now, this particular drone, I believe, was carrying a payload of approximately 5 kilograms, which is very significant when you think about it detonating among and within a class of soldiers there in the field. What this shows is that the idea of there being a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel does very little indeed to cause Hezbollah, the terror organization inside Lebanon, to cease its fire against the soldiers and the people of Israel. Make no mistake about it, the soldiers of the IDF are deployed into southern Lebanon as a direct and exclusive consequence of the fact that Hezbollah has been rocketing Israeli civilians of their own volition, having joined in the fray after the US and Israel began their campaign against the Iranian regime. That's the reason that the IDF is there. It's not there in order to take hold and occupy territory. It's not there because this government in Israel has expansive ambitions within the Middle East. The IDF is there because there were 3 threats that faced and still face the northern residents of Israel. The first threat is that of a ground invasion, similar to what we saw during October 7th from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah in the event that such a ground invasion would take place. The second threat is the anti-tank fire that has been fired from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah into northern Israel against civilian targets. And the third threat is the longer range threat, namely the drones and the rockets and the munitions that can be fired from deeper into Lebanese territory into Israeli territory. Now, the first 2 of those problem sets has largely been dealt with by way of where the Israel Defense Forces is currently ensconced, about 9 kilometers into southern Lebanon. But the third set, that set of drones, munitions, rockets, and other ordnance, that is yet to be dealt with. And in my opinion, Israelis cannot be expected to be convinced by the idea that there is a genuine ceasefire from Hezbollah when Hezbollah is clearly continuing its attacks on our soldiers and it's clearly continuing its attacks on our civilians. So in sum and substance, I think that the Israel Defense Forces needs to get back to being an instrument of a sovereign state, that being the state of Israel. And we actually need to take the fight to Hezbollah, wherever they may be, inside Lebanon. Because if we don't do that, if we allow this phony ceasefire to persist, if we continue to stay our hand, firstly, the buffer zone between Hezbollah and Israel, instead of being in southern Lebanon, will effectively be in northern Israel because the residents of the north will not stay under this level of rocket fire from Hezbollah. That would be absolutely unacceptable. And beyond all of that, it would create a safe haven for Hezbollah in the more northern areas of Lebanon beyond the Litani River, where they know that as a result of the terms of this ceasefire that has essentially been imposed upon Israel, they will know that they can find a safe harbor and safety there beyond the Litani River from where they can launch their attacks against the Israeli people. There's one other consideration to keep in mind here with regard to Hezbollah and Israel staying its hand as a result of the President Trump asking Prime Minister Netanyahu for us to do so. Prime Minister Netanyahu is just about to begin election season in Israel. Now, in the past, the Prime Minister, rather than run against his opponents in the Israeli political scene, has made hay as a result of his ability to run essentially in opposition to an American president and the American president's policies. We saw him do that, for example, to great effect with President Barack Obama. Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed that he was the man uniquely able and qualified to stand up to this American president who was deemed to be quite opposed to Israel in many ways, particularly when it came to him pursuing the JCPOA, the Iran agreement. Here, Prime Minister Netanyahu's got a challenge on his hands because he is absolutely unable to go into this election season running against this American president. By all measures, President Donald Trump has been uncommonly supportive towards Israel. He has proven himself a tremendous ally of the state of Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu will not want to rock that alliance at all by defying the American wish for Israel to stay its hand in southern Lebanon as America tries to thrash out some sorts of an agreement with Iran. So it's a tricky political calculation for the Prime Minister. He won't be able to antagonize this president, but at the same time, if he's courting votes in Israel, which he surely will be doing, he will want the support of voters who absolutely want to see quiet and peace restored to Israel's northern sector. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining this situational briefing from the MirYam Institute. Listen, if you're enjoying this content, please be sure to take a minute and hit the like and subscribe button and also the bell icon, because that's how you can be sure that you'll get all of our exclusive analysis as soon as it's released, along with our cutting-edge footage from the field. And also remember, I want to know your thoughts and to hear your questions, so please be sure to leave those in the comments section down below. Look forward to seeing you next time.